to this computer. There we go.
Okay, that's good.
All right. All right. Okay. Apologies, folks, but we are ready to start.
Alrighty. Am I sharing? You need to enable screen sharing for me.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
And we're ready to go. So this first video is going to be of Sheila Brown. Sheila is a veteran composter. She's been doing it for even before she could actually do it. She had a worm bin in her apartment in New York City. And she loves making compost, and I think that'll show in this.
Starting from this end is this is straw from Island Lumber, and I buy that fairly frequently. I use it a lot because you can get this compressed straw. You can get it for like about $12 a bale, which opens up into a huge amount.
Yes.
So that's often what I use for my dry material. The wet material I don't have so much of a trouble with. This is, I have sheep, so I use their manure, I collect their manure as I can and as I feel like it, and I soak it a bit before it goes into the pile. Over here, a friend the other day brought me 2 big clumps of seaweed, so I was thrilled with that. I've never had seaweed before. And then
That sounds great.
yeah, right. I'm soaking it to try and get some of the salt, so I won't put that liquid into the pile. This is some. Then the other material I have here is this is some horse. I don't know. Someone brought me this the other day. This is from a stable. It's very well rotted for about 5 or 6 years. It's been sitting around there. So I put some of that in, and I also top dress. And then other for green material, I'll take whatever I have. I grow comfrey here, so that's enclosed. And so if I need green, I'll chop a whole bunch of stuff down. This is Virginia creeper up here, so when it gets out of hand about twice a year, I just go around and clip it all, and I kind of cut it fairly small. Right now I have a lot of beans that are finished, so I'll go and take that out of the garden, and then I'll put that in. And I have a lot of nettles and more comfrey growing over there, so I don't know, there always just seems to be green stuff around. That's kind of about it. So here I have 2 bins, and what I have had to do, I've had problems here with rats. I don't put any food scraps in here, but I think they like the animal manure, and then if it gets kind of on the dry side, they find it's a wonderful home because it's warm. So I put hardware cloth all around. I emptied it all out and put hardware cloth all around underneath. And that pretty much has them under control. It was a long time to figure out exactly how to handle the rat problem.
And it looks like you built these out of pallets?
Yeah, I just had some pallets around. Someone came and helped assemble it because I was too old to do all that work myself. In the old days, I could have. And
well, I like it. It's very clever, and I like the front flat holder that you're just basically using.
Right.
Yeah, just stacks.
So
and
these will go in when this gets filled to the top, and then that over there will go on top to keep the rats out. And so the other problem I have had is I think this tree has been sending roots in here. So that's really annoying me. I'm not willing to give up my whole system because of that tree. So this year, first of all, I tried putting this down, and that was unsuccessful. As you can see, the roots, I mean, they were a huge amount more. Of course, this was bad because it's it's got holes in it. It's easy for them to get through. So what I've done this time, I've taken a piece of plywood, about sort of like that. I put that down on the bottom, and then I'm starting again. We'll see how that goes. We'll see. I mean, let's see. We'll see. I'll just show this if you want. Let's see if I can get this to the camera. This is the compost that I harvested this spring. This is what I have left. I had about 6 or 8 buckets, and I don't
Yeah,
know
it looks
if
beautiful.
your camera can see that. So I'm pretty pleased with that.
And you looks like you sifted that.
I think that has been sifted.
Yeah.
And then in this container, this was only partially finished and not sifted. And the reason I say it's partially finished, because this is what I took out when I realized that the roots were coming in. So I just use this when I make the compost with the green and the brown, the green and the dry stuff. I like to put some soil in as well, because there's a lot of microorganisms. Basically, my goal is all about microorganisms. Anything that will benefit microorganisms, I go for. And anything that harms microorganisms, I try not to go for.
Sure.
So.
Well, that makes sense, and it goes along with the whole idea of feeding the soil and not the plants.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love to make soil, and I like things to grow, and I like to eat out of my garden. I'm not great for harvesting, but I love to make soil, and I just love to compost. I started in New York City, in Manhattan. I had a worm bin in my apartment in our bathroom. And anyone who's done indoor worm composting knows that you have a problem with fruit flies. So anyway, I did start a long time ago, and in New York I had a bumper sticker on my car, our car, that said, "Compost happens." And in New York City, that was kind of an unusual sticker to have on your car. So anyway, I've been doing that for a long time.
The bin on the left there, is that last year's compost that is now completed?
No, this is the one I'm starting.
Oh, this is the one you're working on now.
After I realized that the tree was taking over, and it could be the redwood tree, I don't know, but I think it's this cherry tree right here.
I think that's likely.
Yeah, that's taking over. So I know I'm working against nature, which is not an intelligent thing to do, but anyway, sometimes we all have defects. So
you're building this up now?
So I'm starting this now.
And
this is brand
you're
new.
starting it by layering, or how do you?
Yeah, so this will
Let's
harvest
come over
next
and take a
spring.
look. I'm coming over to take a look. Okay, so this is building.
This
just happening.
has been built all summer.
And when did you build that?
All summer. Once I started my system.
Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about. That.
Well, this is something that's on top. With some weeds that I threw in here, but it's not all the way down through here. So, it looks great.
Yeah, and you started that in springtime, or?
Yeah, I started that probably April or March, maybe April. I think I got a late start because personal things in my life. So I like to keep the straw all around it. I don't know if that's essential or not, but it's just what I like to do. And because then the straw kind of starts breaking down, so then when I use it, again, it's already moist and kind of wet, and it just seems to make a nice starter continuing on. But this is warm, it's not hot. I do put a thermometer in here, but this has been in here for months, and it's quite warm down in here, but not hot. I do put a thermometer in here from time to time, and I don't get much heat, maybe maximum up to 100 the first few days. If I had grass clippings, I think it would be better, but I don't believe in lawnmowers, so I don't have grass clippings. But that's the best if anyone has grass clippings. So anyway, it's doing good. I'm happy with it, and it'll be really nice compost for next spring.
And when will you use this?
I'll use that next spring.
Next spring.
Yeah, when I start next spring. And that's a combination of the various things that I've taught you about. So in here, I kind of sometimes like to put a little something in the center because it likes oxygen. And so I do kind of like that, so that keeps oxygen. But you can see here's the
Virginia creeper there.
Virginia creeper. Yeah. And so do you want me to do a little layering with the stuff I have around?
If you want to, sure.
Okay.
Do you want to take a break or do you?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm fine. So this is.
Maybe just give us a couple minute demo of a little compost building.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. And so this is, you can see nothing's breaking down in here now.
Yeah, just very beginning.
Yeah, very beginning. So I'll start with, I do all this by instinct, I have to tell you. I'm going to start by putting some seaweed in. I've never done seaweed before, so interesting to see how this is going to work. But of course, seaweed is great for the garden soil. And I probably won't be using too much of this since I don't gather my own seaweed, but I was thrilled when someone gifted it to me. I gave her some worms to start her own worm bin, which she didn't have, and she's all excited, and then I got the seaweed in return. So let's see, maybe I'll put in a little soil, and I'm gonna just, sorry about all this, well, it's a little hard to.
So you're going to get some of the old partially composted.
Partially done compost. This will have a lot of microorganisms in it. And I think it'll, I don't know, I think it'll work well with the seaweed. So I'll put that down. And then I think I'd like to get some green material. So I don't think I want to put that in. I want to put that down. I'll take get some comfrey here. Choose my butt. This comfrey is a little dry right now. I'm not really happy with it. So I'm going to go get some of my bean crop here. Put this in. So this is a mixture of beans, weeds without seeds. But if weeds that produce seeds go out into the forest. And I'm pretty fussy about that. And I think that's a pretty, I mean, my instincts are it's really, really important for this kind of a bed because it doesn't heat up enough to kill the weeds, the seeds. So, and I'm cutting this down a bit because it will heat up faster. Normally I'd have this prepared a little better, I think. But this kale, I have endless amounts of kale in my garden. So, and I'll put some manure in. So this is the manure, the watery manure. I like everything to be quite wet, quite moist. So I've got seaweed, greens.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of wet. So do you normally, or over time, will you have to wet this again?
Yes.
Okay.
This would all get watered down.
And then once a week or once a month, or how often would you re-water it?
Oh,
Or that would depend on the weather.
and my instincts, right.
Okay.
I think I'm going to put a little bit more of that old compost in there because that's so much manure and seaweed. And so normally I would have more greens, a little higher on the greens. And then, so having this bin for the straw is really a terrific thing.
Yeah, I like that.
Straw comes in it, straw comes out of it, whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I just cover it up with old pieces of plywood that I have around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have water right over here. I collect the water from the roof here. So I could, you know, even if my water system wasn't working, I could.
And then you would just continually add more green on top of that and keep building it up and layering it the same way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I had, I'd water everything down here now again, even though it was pretty wet that went in there with the wet manure and the wet thing, but I would water it again.
Yeah.
And then maybe put some more dry straw on top. And then in the winter time, I put plywood over it in the winter time.
Okay.
So it doesn't get drenched. Once it starts really raining, I put things over the top. So I have all these pieces of plywood which were left over from a chicken coop that was built over there that I didn't want. So, as I say, I use what I have, and if I don't have it, then I don't get it. Right? That's kind of how I am.
And why did you settle on this system? I mean, what? Because there's all these different systems. Huh? Like as opposed to a 3-bin system, or you know.
Well, I'm not an engineering type.
So it's simpler.
It's just how I studied permaculture for a while, and which I adore. And it's what's doable for me. The materials that I had on hand, whatever.
Yeah.
And
well, I like it. It's elegant and simple, and it's nicely contained.
I'm very lucky to have this space.
Yeah.
Space is great, and lots of buckets, and live on Vashon where you can get materials. And
right. Yeah.
All that kind of thing. I'm very fussy though about the materials. Like, if someone had brought me horse manure that was fresher, I would not be using it.
So, I want to thank you very much, Sheila, for this great tour. You have a lovely house and garden, and your compost looks beautiful. I think it's an inspiration to everybody that you don't have to be a scientist to make really good compost. So,
That's true.
Thank you very much for sharing this.
Thank you, Will. It was a lot of fun doing it. And I think all it takes is just kind of love of the natural world and love of knowing how important our topsoil is for our survival.
Indeed. I think that's our best form of resilience is rebuilding our soils.
Rebuilding our soils, keeping them covered is very, very important. So the soil doesn't get damaged by rain and doesn't blow off in the wind. Very important to do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Will.
Let's see. Nancy, you have to unmute.
Hi, I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Sheila. That was really interesting and gorgeous soil you've created. And we got a little peek of your garden too. It looks like that's beautiful as well. Tom, have we collated questions? Okay, can you unmute? So Will, I think because you're now the host, you're gonna have to unmute Tom.
No, actually, I think I'm unmuted now.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So there have been no questions that came in. Barry made a comment about seaweed, but rather than me read it, maybe Barry would like to state it and maybe elaborate so that it becomes part of the audio record for this video.
Barry, you have to unmute.
Barry's on mute right now.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep, you're
Yes.
good.
Okay, I just commented that one time last summer, or last fall, I used a bunch of seaweed that we collected, just stuff that was, washed up on the shore. Like Sheila, I rinsed it and put it in, and I'd heard that it was a good green material, and I thought, well, it's probably full of micronutrients and little things that have to be good for the soil in general. It composted well. It was not smelly, like I'd been warned. And I have no idea if it really worked, but in my mind it did. So my garden's happier for it, I'm sure. It was a little bit of a hassle because I'm not that close to the water, but and I don't know if I'll do it again because it involved a lot of heavy 5-gallon buckets, but if I had access to it, I'd sure use it.
Great, thank you.
So Nancy, since we don't have a backlog of questions and the only new thing that has shown up is a logistical matter, which Will has addressed about the video eventually being posted online with zero waste Vashon, I wonder if to make sure that any questions become part of the video record, that rather than entering them in chat at this point, it would make more sense just to speak the question out loud and have, I think the procedure we had set up before was that Will would initially take the question and then pass it off to someone else if it made sense to do so. How's that sound?
I think that sounds great. If anybody would like to just verbally ask a question at this point, raise your hand, flag us down.
So we have one
And,
from Debbie Jackson that just came in.
Pardon me?
We have one from Debbie
Right,
Jackson.
so I can, let me take care of the written one and then we'll shift to audio handling of questions from here on in, I suppose, unless somebody can't do audio after I read Debbie's question, then I think it would make more sense to put these directly into the audio record rather than pass them through the chat. But Debbie did ask a question about rats and pests. Is the pile enclosed? And she's trying to decide where she's going to locate her compost pile, and so that she could just throw everything into it. Is kitchen waste that they put into a bucket okay to leave in the open? And that bucket only has vegetable matter. So that is the essence of her question. And Will, do you want to take that or pass it on to someone?
Well, yeah, they're good questions. There's several questions. I think you will see that most people for rat protection are using hardware cloth as screening. Rats are a problem on island and in the city. So if you don't want rats, you need to either use just yard waste, and that will definitely minimize it. However, there is a chance that mice or whatever will try to overwinter in there. It's a safe shelter and it's warm. But if you really are concerned about that, your best bet is either to use a contained composting system, which we'll be showing in 2 weeks, like a tumbler system, or use some hardware cloths to keep them out of the thing, particularly if you put in food scraps. But we have a worm bin, and it does not have hardware cloth, and we have food scraps in that, and we have not had a horrible problem with them. Every once in a while, maybe once a year, I will see a rat. But they're more interested in the compost than they are me, so I don't get upset by them. But if you're upset by them, you're going to have to put up some simple defenses by enclosing everything in hardware cloths. If you just want to throw have a pile, just a general thing, watch a little later on and you'll see how just making a pile can work also. So we are going to have all different types of composting here. The next one is going to be Ken Miller. He's very more scientific about it. And then we're going to have Nancy Hostica, and she's got some very simple laid back ways of doing it. So all work, and that's the whole point of these videos. There's lots of ways to approach the problem. Okay, we had a question from Jerry. You had a question, you're going to have to unmute.
Yes, thanks, Will. I just wondered why kitchen scraps weren't used in your bin there, Sheila.
We can't hear.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Unmute.
Yeah,
Well, there we go.
I have a wonderful worm bin right outside my kitchen door. So all of my appropriate food scraps go into the worm bin.
Okay,
And
thank you.
then all that worm stuff comes out and enters into the garden later on as it's harvested.
Okay.
very good. All right, there any other questions, or shall we go on to Ken's video? I'm looking to see.
Nancy,
I have a question.
Yeah, Nancy's got a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Sheila, do you get worms in your big bins with the shade, with the
Mhm.
cloth on it?
Yeah, I do. Actually, not a huge
Yeah.
amount, but there are worms in there. Mainly, I find the worms seem to be coming into the garden beds themselves.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's, yeah, like everyone has. Yeah.
Nice system. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I have a question. So Sheila, you build this up throughout the spring and summer, and then you leave it sit through the winter, and
Yeah.
then it's ready the next spring. Is that basically your timeline?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So in light of time, I think we've got to move on and get Ken's video up next. So if you give me a moment here, I will.
While you're doing that, I want to ask Sheila, how do you use your compost? What do you use them in? I mean, do you just lay it around the plants, or do you make soil blocks, or how do you use the finished product?
No, loosely, I have various garden beds that are like roughly 4 by 8. And so when I turn them in the spring, which I do with one of Bob Powell's composting plows, then I just put a bucket or a bucket and a half in each bed, and just spread it around and work it in. Very simple.
Sorry. What is a composting plow?
Oh, that's the best thing in the whole world. That's not the official name of it, but who knows the name of it? Someone knows the name of it.
I think it's broad fork.
Yeah, broad forks. Instead of using anything like a rototiller or anything like that, because that's not good for the microorganisms.
Right.
And so it breaks down the soil instead of helping to build up. But Bob Powell here on the island makes them. That's one of his business things. And they're for sale. I know for sure at Ace, and I suspect at Island Lumber. And they're wonderful exercises for the human being who's working them, because they kind of build muscles and keep you young and all that. So
Great, thank you.
really good to have one.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing the screen here. And this is Ken Miller, who's been composting for a long time. Has a great history of it, and has come up with a very reproducible formula that he's been using for, I think, the past 20 years. And I'd like to introduce you to Ken Miller. Ken lives on the north part of Vashon and has been composting for how long, Ken?
This is my 50th year. And I've been doing this system for over 20 years. And I stopped turning it over 20 years ago. And I learned about the static pile, and it's making great compost. And where my product sits a year, what I try to do is every June 21st around the equinox, I will stop and start my new one. So that one right there is cooling right now, and curing. This is the active one, and the far left one is the one I'm using, which I'm almost out, and I'm running out pretty fast. And then I just repeat the process again. When that one is empty, that will be the active one, and this will be cooling, curing, and then I'll be using the middle one. So it's just a rotating system. This one here is more of our roughage that we pull weeds and whatnot out of our garden and around the place. I throw comfrey and nettles in that as well. And also I spray it down with this juice I make from the comfrey and nettles in a barrel system I have down below. And that's got all kinds of the NPK plus manganese and silica. It's really good stuff.
So you don't turn it at all, but do you wet it or do anything else during it?
Yes, I do wet it, and I've got thermometers in there to monitor the temperature. And I put hydrosylate on it as well, the fish hydrosylate from Pacific Grow, and that helps add good nutrients to it as well, chitin and things like that. I also sprinkle some of my charcoal mix on it that I make from charcoal, rock dust, and worm castings. And I'll layer that on the top, and then I'll put my straw on. The straw is to help insulate it in the winter time, and also to break up the heavy rains, so it doesn't wash everything out. The highest temperature I have ever achieved is 156 degrees.
Wow.
And that's only been one time. Usually it hovers around 110 to 120. Now this is called a thermophilic system, where it starts out as a mesophilic at a lower temperature up to about 113, and beyond 113 it becomes thermophilic, and that's when the worms will disappear for a while until it cools back down, and then they'll come back in, and other microbes and bacteria are in there working that. Some of them really like that high temperature. But then there's the 4 stages: of mesophilic, thermophilic, cooling, and curing of this compost. And the 4 things you need for your compost is oxygen, water, temperature, and balanced diet. And my balanced diet is I'll get 3 5-gallon buckets of my browns and 1 5-gallon bucket of kitchen scraps, and that's what I throw in. And I've been doing that for over 20 years, and I've had great success.
So during the course of a year, as you're building up a pile, do you keep that ratio and you just keep on building it up and building it up?
Yes, this has dropped. It was up just above this height right here, so it's dropped a good foot or more, almost 2 feet. That's just last June 21st.
Wow.
I keep thinking I'm gonna have a lot of compost, but by the time this next year, it's halfway down there. It's amazing.
What led you, to choose this method?
I guess I got tired of turning that stuff. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I read Joe Jenkins' book years ago, 99, I believe it was, and he has probably one of the best chapters on composting of anything I've ever read.
And say that again, that is?
Joe Jenkins, his Humanure Handbook.
Okay.
It's got one of the best systems for chapters on compost I've ever read. And I compost, I do everything the books usually say don't do. I compost meat products. dairy products, everything that they say don't, I put in there, and no problems. I mean, I have wire on there I put to keep the critters out. Primarily raccoons, they come ripping through here sometimes. I have found a rat or two sometimes, but not that much. It's amazing. And I hear other people, they have rats all over the place, but I've not had that problem. And it's due to the process I use in putting the straw on. And this is the only disturbance I do to my pile is when I'm going to add product, I'll move it back like that in the center, and that's where I deposit everything. Level it out, then I'll bring that I moved back over it, and sometimes I'll add a little of the finished compost to it, and minerals, azomite rock dust or my charcoal mix, and then I'll put the straw over that, rake it back over, and if it needs it, I'll put more straw, which I have a bin there with it. Straw in my bin there where I can get to it and add to it. And so, yeah. But
And let's take a look at the temperature here.
well, this is the one that's curing. I moved it, and it was just about 82 degrees, which is the cooling down stage. And then at some point, it will get to, it'll just drop more. You can see it going up, and then it just cures. So,
And this pile here is now how old? And
this is my active pile that started June 21st, 22nd. And I just added to this 2 or 3 days ago, and it's slowly going up. It takes a few days for it to creep up. It's about 106 or something like that. I can't see it that close.
yeah.
Somewhere in that range. So it's in the active stage. That's what I like about the thermometer. It's in the active stage.
Right.
And another thing, by not turning it, you're not destroying all the mycelium that's in there, that's in the
Right.
microbes
Yeah.
and worm tunnels as well. And so, yeah, generally, it's I really like it a lot. It's a great process.
And does it stop in winter, or does it stay active in winter, or do you change anything in winter?
I have had it in the 120, as high as 120 at one time. It'll drop down into the 100 range, and it's still producing. It's still making stuff. There's workers down there really going at it. I have not had any freezing, so I understand that people that have the system in cold climates where it's freezing, it will actually stop, but then they keep adding to it because as thaw comes along, it'll start activating again. So another reason to put straw on it too is to help it insulate it.
Right,
So, yeah.
right. That makes sense. And is this finished compost here?
This is my finished compost.
So let's
That's
take
what
a
I'm
look at
using
it.
right now. I do sift it with the screens, and that's, you can see little chunks of charcoal in there that I've added. I grind up my charcoal, and
That looks beautiful.
well, we've had good luck with it. This is my ground up charcoal.
So this is actually biochar, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It becomes biochar when you put it in soil. And yeah, so, and this morning I put this together. I wanted to show people how simple it is to make a bin out of pallets.
Okay, let's take a look.
And what I use are the zip ties. And I've helped a person here on the island build one, and she was amazed. She says, I could do this. So what I do is, like here, I in this bottom of the pile, I mean the bin, I will make a bowl with my grubbing hoe, make a dish, and I'll put straw and weeds or whatever, and charcoal. So that makes a biological sponge. So if anything, which I've never had, any leaching or whatever of liquids coming, never have seen.
How do you know you've added enough water to the pile, or how do you avoid getting it over wet?
Well, believe it or not, most people do not add enough water. And
Oh, I'm guilty of that.
well, I am too at times, but right there is a good.
So when you're putting in stuff, you do a check on it and sort of.
Yeah, I will add water to that after I've added product to it, to the active one, and also this one too. Periodic, especially if it's a hot summer, which we haven't had that much this year. I will come out and take a 2-gallon can and just sprinkle it down of water, rainwater. I'll use only rainwater on my bins and my garden as well.
Well, Ken, thank you very much. This has been very educational, and I'm glad that we can share this with our CWV members and the rest of the island community. And I hope we will have a session so you can answer any local questions. But this is very impressive, and the compost is some of the nicest homemade I've seen. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ken. That was great, very informative, and a different approach. Your additives are quite interesting. It's clear you've evolved over the 20 years that you've been doing this, or more than 20. So, do we have questions, Tom?
No questions have come in, but a couple of well, actually, one new question has come in. Let me take care of an older one first. Not a question, but a comment. Lavinia gave a link to a Beachcomber article on the farm tool. But if you want to find it very easily, you can just type in Beachcomber and farm tool as search terms on Google, and it comes up as the first hit. So it's easily found even if you don't have access or don't remember the link. As far as other questions, Marianne asked where you can get straw on the island.
So there's two primary sources. One is the begins with V's, a VIP farm supply that's off of Bank Road. And they have full bales. It's very expensive, I'll forewarn you. And then Island Lumber has compressed bales. They're intensely compressed, but when you flake them apart, they become, there's a lot of product there, full bale. And that's what I used in the Waste to Garden site. And I think that's what Sheila's also using.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, Debbie has a question, has a comment with an implicit question. And then there's one there that we'll get to as soon as the written one is taken care of. Where she asks about piles without container sides, without pallets or without wooden forms. So maybe somebody wants.
That's coming up in the next video. So the next video, Nancy uses that system. And she sort of added to it where she said she watched a TED Talk that she accessed through a link on Zero Waste Fashion site that said, just use cut up leaves for your compost and no other stuff. And thoughts. And essentially what that is doing is that's mimicking a forest floor. And it will make wonderful compost given time. And I think you'll see in Nancy's site, she has one pile where essentially that's all it is. It's leaves and stuff that comes out of her chipper, just stuff that you clean up and, during the winter windfall, et cetera. And she just piled it in and put a tarp on it and watered it down. And, come back a year later and you'll see the results. So yeah, it's there's many ways to do it. The difference between, say, a system like Ken's system or Barry's system and the pile system is speed. If you really just kind of want to do it loosely, then you give it enough time and you will start getting compost at the bottom of it. And we have a yard waste pile that just gets, it gets almost chest tall for us. And, I moved it this year after 2 years. And underneath, I probably had 2 feet of beautiful compost that I spread around all of our rhododendrons, et cetera. And they're absolutely loving it. So that's a lazy person's way of doing it. It's just a pile that eventually underneath it, nature went to work. And I didn't do anything. I didn't water it, didn't do anything to it. So that works. And I think Sheila's actually got several piles around that where they're sort of like no muss, no fuss, just let nature do the job. So all work. It's just really what fits your lifestyle and the time frame that you need to compost.
So Jerry's been waiting patiently to ask questions. So why don't we shift to his audio question? And it looks like we have one more afterwards on the chat.
Can you make a beautiful compost? Have you happened to taking a soil sample to determine the NPK in your mixture?
Not the compost itself, but
Yeah, the compost.
no, I have not done that.
You have an inkling of what that nitrogen component may be?
No, I don't.
Okay, all right.
So I have a comment on that. So Jerry, and I can try to get you a link to this, but there's an interesting philosophy and school of thought that is changing.
Yeah.
And it started changing as a result of the Human Genome Project, where we finally now are learning that there is so much in the biome that is doing the work of making those essential ingredients. And we learned this because the Human Genome Project led us to looking at human gut bacteria and what they were doing. And we found out there's an entire universe there of quadrillions of viruses and bacteria, et cetera, that are working in unison to help us live and to manage our thing. And once they started seeing this and their eyes started opening up, they started looking at the soil biome. And what David Johnson is now lecturing on and showing very, very carefully with very, very detailed science and very detailed testing is that if you get the mycelial growth and you get the fungal growth going there and you get a good biome going, that you can have extremely low NPK value but on the compost. But what you are doing essentially is charging a battery in the soil that takes care of that, and it takes care of the delivery systems to the plants. And they've actually got live electron microscope videos where they're showing it being delivered. It's absolutely amazing. So the philosophy that is changing here is that compost, particularly compost that has good fungal content, can do amazing things that sort of they just simply bypass the need for all the enriched NPK stuff, which really comes from chemical farming practices, which comes from doing an artificial environment. And I'm very anxious to start trying this. This is really, really new science. This is within the past 2 years. But it's really fascinating. He's got several videos on YouTube now of his lectures, and one I think was a TED Talk. But they're actually seeing some remarkable results in the field, taking true agriculture and corn crops, et cetera, and seeing that just by putting on a right amount of fungal compost onto the surface, and it's not a lot, that they're able to come within 6% yield of a full NPK enriched agricultural fill, except at an enormously reduced cost. So it's a very exciting, very new stuff coming on that way.
Will, how do I determine if I have good fungal? Is this something visual that you're talking about when I look?
If you have a microscope, yeah, you could.
Oh,
You
okay.
could.
So it's a microscopic thing.
Yeah, but you could also test for it. You can see the mycelia. You can see the little fungal white threads sometimes
Yes,
going through it.
yes.
That's
Yep.
a good sign.
Okay,
That's
Mushrooms.
yeah,
if you have mushrooms growing on it, that's an interesting sign.
okay.
But you'll see from David Johnson's stuff, and I think you'll like it because it's extremely scientific. But you can actually formalize a formula that will guarantee that you get good fungal volume.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I use wood chips as well, and not a lot, just a sprinkling, and that'll bring it. Also, the leaf compost that's a fungal compost right there, and I let mine sit for over a year, and it breaks down. It's beautiful humus. I've got some right now that's ready, pretty close, and it's just a beautiful humus in that breakdown. So a lot of good luck with that.
We have
While we're on the topic of leaf piles, we do have a question from Marianne asking about whether the leaf piles need to be covered. I don't know if that has a time frame implied with that or not, but that is the question. Do leaf piles need to be covered?
I don't cover mine. They stay open. Just like nature. I try to mimic is what nature does. And it's making beautiful soil underneath the leaf pile.
do
Just like
you Ken, do you shred the leaves with a lawnmower or something first, or?
I have if they're not too wet. Right now I've got a pile that's pretty wet, but I could probably run it through my a hammer mill and my wood chipper, and I think that would probably do a good job.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, the smaller, just like my charcoal, the smaller I make it, the more surface area you have. So yeah. Also, mine is right next to the wooded area, and that also encourages nematodes and other microbes to creep into my pile as well. And I'll sometimes go out into the forest and gather just a small scraping of soil and throw it on my compost. And I know people have a lot of problems with voles and moles, but I collect those little piles of dirt, sift out the rocks and other debris, and throw that in as well. So yeah, I just try all kinds of different things.
I have
Very
a
good.
question. Tom, do we have more, or can I ask a question?
No, go ahead. One just piled up or just showed up, but go ahead with your question and then I'll address Debbie's comment. So go ahead.
Okay. Ken, you showed one of your bins was your sort of your garden waste and weeds and things that go in there. Can you talk a little bit more about what goes in there and then what role it plays in your process?
Yeah, it's all of our leftover product from our gardens, other weedy things I pick up. And it's not heated, so it's not killing the seeds that's in there, but I'll just spread that out around trees and whatnot. But like I said in that video, I made a mistake one time and put that into my other compost mix and discovered I had a lot of kale.
So do you just let that sort of sit there and break down? You don't do any additional adding or layering or anything?
Oh, we keep adding to it as the fall here. I'm adding leftover comfrey and nettles that I'm finding, other debris, and I just let it sit there. That's
Okay.
basically what I do. I let time help me out. I'm not in a hurry to make my compost. That's why you see the commercial units, the windrows and all that. They turn that several times a week, and that's destroying all the good microbes in that compost pile. And that's why that's when I learned, 20 years ago. But I learned about composting 50 years ago, and I was doing it in a loose pile. I lived down near Battleground, Washington, on some acreage, and I learned from old timers that taught me how to do that. So I have a lot of good teachers, a lot of great teachers in my life. So yeah.
And
So-
now you're teaching all of us, and we thank you for that.
There's all kinds of ways to do this.
So Debbie has a comment and an implied question that follows on what Ken said. Debbie mentions in the chat stream there that she'd had a pile of leaves sitting around for a number of years and then realized she could use it in a composting context, went to dig it up, and it was all filled with roots and thus really hard to dig up. So I guess the implied question is, if you leave a pile for a long time, how do you deal with it? Or is there a way to avoid dealing with roots from plants that may be growing into that pile?
I've not had that yet. In my compost pile right now that I'm emptying out, there are some roots, but small. I can easily pull them out. And if I can't, I have a nice little grubbing hoe that will chop it right off. And I toss that in. But no, I've not had any in my leaf. I have two metal or wire bins of leaves right now. I've not had any problems. I should say the second one is a new one, so it's not had time to
It's going to depend on your local circumstance. I have built really nice bins and set them up in 3-bin system and put all the cloth there, had gig, and I went to turn my pile after the first year, and it was solid roots. I mean, absolutely solid roots. All the soil was one big root ball, and it's because we have a nearby redwood tree that is struggling because of our dry summers like that, and it headed right for them, and it literally took over the compost pile. So this
I
year in that area, for the first time, I've got plastic down in a section to see if I can slow it down. I don't mind giving some to the redwood and I'm sprinkling it around it to help it out, but it can't happen all.
I can speak to that also. We had people come in and chip down branches and things from big storms, and they made 2 nice piles, both quite near big leaf maples. The one pile I spread down a tarp and they sprayed all their chip stuff there. The other one, I didn't get to it and they sprayed directly on the ground, and the one was almost unusable. It was so full of roots. It was very hard to get anything out of it. And the one that was sitting on a tarp broke down beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So folks, we should get to Nancy's video, who you just heard speak. So we stay on schedule here.
Look, can I just interrupt for one moment to point out that Rondi has a long comment with respect to Will's description of Johnson's work. And so, yeah, to move on would be fine, but there is a paragraph's worth of interesting comment there by Rondi that people should pick up, and I'll try to see if I can also come up with a condensation of it for after the end of this next video.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big topic, what David Johnson is talking about, that we could almost do a separate series on that, but except that we're learning about it. So I will put up, I'll see the links for a couple of his videos and we'll post them. And they've also been posted on the Whole Vashon Project's Facebook page if you're looking for that. Because it's fascinating stuff. It's very new, and I think it's the future.
Thank you, Will.
Okay, so I'm going to now put on Nancy, and here we are today at the home of Nancy Hostica, and we're here to learn about the beehive composter, also known as the earth machine. Hi. So why don't you tell us a bit about this and why you have it, and what type of composting system it is?
Well, I've just always composted it as long as I've gardened. And this is my kitchen composter. I take things out, I keep a container under the sink with all the vegetable pairings, etc. And every couple of days I come out and pour it in here and spread it out, and add a layer of usually leaves, dead leaves, carbon, and water it. And that's it. And about once every 6 months it gets pretty full up, and so I jiggle it and lift it off and turn it into the new spot. I just take this thing and put it here and start piling it in. And then when I get down to the really good stuff, then I put it on my yard in various places.
So essentially, it sounds like it's doing 2 operations, and it's composting and it's a worm bin. Is that correct?
Yeah, the worms came on their own, and they're thick in there. You can look in there now and dig a little bit, and there's just masses. So I'm happy with that. And every once in a while, I'll take a bunch of, well, when I take out the good compost part, I spread them here, take them and spread them around the yard. I've never had a shortage of worms. In fact, sometimes it seems to be too wet in the middle of the winter, and they'll start crawling up the sides trying to get out. I presume it's because it's too wet. It's a static system, I guess. You would call it a static system. I only turn it once every about 6 months and harvest then. It's really simple. That's why I like it. I don't have to do very much.
Do they still make this?
I don't know.
Okay.
This is the only one I've ever seen on island, but then I haven't talked to other people that compost. And I found this at Granny's, a little bit battered, a little worse for wear, but I kind of jiggle it. It's in 2 pieces here. in the lid, and it stays together pretty well. And then some rodent chewed through it here, and my husband stuck on a piece of plastic, and we're good to go again. They're almost indestructible.
And is this open on the bottom to the ground?
Yes, it's just open on the bottom
Okay.
of the ground. I usually, as a first layer, will put chips or something really rough, twigs to kind of give a little aeration on the bottom.
Mhm.
But that may just be my imagination, but I think it helps.
Uh-huh. And do you rob it through that bottom trapdoor any times?
I
or-
do rob it sometimes if I'm desperate for something, but not too often. I sort of peek to see how
I mean,
it's doing.
so it's like an inspection board.
It is, it is. You see,
Mhm.
this stuff at the bottom is pretty good. Got some worms coming out. Smells nice and earthy.
Uh-huh.
It's not perfect. I don't know that it ever reaches the requisite, what is it, 130 degrees or
Right.
something in the middle of the pile.
Right.
I never really check.
My
So
guess,
I'm not sure it does a complete compost.
right, my guess is no, because the worms would probably not like it. It's the reason they don't like something sitting in the sun or like that.
Good point. They can get
yeah.
too hot for them.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
I guess the only other thing I do is with a little tongs, when I throw in some more vegetables, I'll pick out mainly citrus rinds because it takes them so long to compost, and just throw them over there and
Uh-huh.
they decay quite
Uh-huh.
quickly. So there's my system.
Is there anything that you don't put in there? You avoid putting?
Bones and grease and things like that.
Okay. And do you put cardboard or anything else?
I haven't. I could. I
Mhm.
could shred up paper, but
Yeah,
for the
I've
most
heard
part,
that they like pizza boxes and things like that. We're trying that for the first time. That's why I asked. Well, let's take a peek inside and see what it looks like inside. Maybe the worms will come out and say hello.
Good idea.
All right. So this is basically you put on top of your food scraps a variety of just leaves
Mhm.
and needles
I'm
and
not getting too many right there. There they are. There's a
Oh,
whole
yeah.
bunch of
oh yeah.
worms for you.
Uh-huh. And they just showed up on their own.
They show up on their own. They
Yep.
do indeed.
Uh-huh.
The first bugs you see in here are these little potato bugs, I call them, the little roly-poly
Uh-huh.
guys.
And then do you take the kitchen scraps and just put them on top, or do you make a hole and put
No,
them inside?
I put them on top and spread them around because
Okay.
it tends to be drier towards the outside, and so I spread out stuff, and then I get things out of the woods for the most part, a lot of leaf
Uh-huh.
litter, and that's my carbon layer for the most part.
Yeah. And do you
and
keep
then I pour in a bucket of water
Ah.
every
Okay.
time, a
Okay.
couple of gallons.
And do you keep a separate stash of brown, like of leaves or something else?
No, I go out in the woods.
Okay. Well, very good. Now, I understand you've got another system also.
I
Can we
do.
take a look at that?
You sure can.
All right. Let me stop. Okay, here we are again with Nancy, and we're at composting system number 2. So why don't you explain what we have here? It looks like a lot of yard waste. And
This is a 2-bin system, and as I pull weeds and prune through the spring and summer, I pile them in one side
Mhm.
totally. And then about now, maybe October or November, we'll come and turn this into the other side, which is over here.
And you've laid plastic down, it looks like.
Just big black plastic bags I cut open and laid down because there's big leaf maple here, and if I don't, the roots from the big leaf maple will come right up in my compost pile and make it useless. So I lay down some black plastic and throw heavy things on it. So we'll turn this over here and get it good and wet. I wait until it's good and rainy in November and then water it down and cover it with a tarp and leave it. And by spring I can take compost out of it. It again is not I don't think it's a perfect system. I don't think it ever gets to be 130 degrees in there or whatever the temperature is. So I'm always pulling out a few twigs and things, but it does a pretty good job. So once that side's empty, I'll lay down plastic and then start putting the raw goods in there. So I always have some place that I can put new stuff and sneak old stuff out.
Right. And do you have any problem with weeds or coming out of it, or do you just deliberately exclude anything that has seeds on it?
No, I throw everything in there, absolutely everything, and I don't cut it up nearly as much as I should. You will sometimes see iris. Various things will come popping up out of there, but I just pull them as I see them roughly. It's how shall I say, the whole system is a little more loose, wild and loose and cutthroat than the system
Yeah.
back there. And then my third most ruthless system, the easiest system, is this one. This was about 2 winters ago. This was a pile of raw chips of branches that had fallen in storms and needles and everything. And I watered it and covered it for the winter. And by the next spring, I could start pulling out stuff like this, which is really good for mulch. It has some biggish chips in it, but that's all right. It will suppress weeds. And as time went by, we get into even finer stuff.
Yeah, that looks like forest floor humus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smells really good. It smells really woody. The best thing about it, there are no weed seeds.
Uh-huh.
When you lay this down on top of your flower beds, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. And this was just chipped
It was just
wood from windfall.
Just windfall. And some of them were quite big. But even so, you put this down, it will suppress some weeds. And if you wait long enough, that's what you get.
Yeah. Well, I like easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it's great. And then what do you do with your compost? Where do you use it? All over?
I
Or?
use it around on my flower beds, top dress, everything. I very often will sprinkle a good basic fertilizer and then top dress with this or the compost or
Yeah.
either one.
Yeah. That a spring feeding typically, or?
Yes, spring feeding, and now, this is the best time of year to be able to divide and plant because you don't even have to water and things.
Right.
And then you bed them in with a nice mulch layer. They're good to go.
Good.
Spring and fall in Washington.
Yeah. Well, you have a beautiful spot here, and thank you very much for showing us your composting systems. They're obviously working because the plants are thriving. So.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, I
That's great.
apologize. I apologize about the audio. Unfortunately, a neighbor decided to mow the lawn while doing it, and so we were competing against a lawnmower in the background.
All right. So, Tom, do we have questions for Nancy on her two different?
Yes, let me call that up. Let's see. Well, my chat seems to have disappeared, but I remember the last things that came up. So Rondi had a long comment of comparing some of Johnson's work with more traditional practices involving fermented manure. So I would recommend that you look at that chat when we collect it. Secondly, Will had a follow-up with a link to some of that work. And then with respect to the current or the most recent presentation, there were 2 links to both the composter that one could buy at Home Depot, I think it was, and another link about how to build a composting system like was being demonstrated. I think at this point, especially till I get my chat pulled back up, any questions that people have should be directed through the Zoom audio and video itself to Will, who will then, if needed, pass it on to someone else if a different answer could be gotten. So feel free to speak while I search for my chat stream here.
So yeah, just raise your hand if you have a question.
Jerry does.
Jerry, so you have to unmute.
Yes, I'm unmuted. When you use wood chips, are there a species of wood that should be avoided? For example, black walnut or western red cedar?
Yes. Both. Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Walnut is basically, it's almost like a weed proofer. I mean, it's toxic
Yes.
to a lot of other plants. So you don't want walnut leaves, walnut seeds, or anything to do with walnut in your compost. And cedar will slowly break down, but it's a really slow, right? So it will inhibit growth before it finally breaks down.
So Western red cedar is not a poison per se. It just takes a long time to break down.
Right. It
Okay.
may actually have some inhibiting, I don't know, something in the oils that
Yeah.
actually does
Okay.
sort of prevent it, but it's not recommended.
Yeah. Okay.
Conversely, what works really fast and great are alder.
Yes.
Alder,
Oh, yeah.
alder is a legume, so it's a nitrogen fixer, and they're wonderful, and they break down exceptionally fast.
I saw a question earlier about madrone or arbutus, whether those would make good chips, and I don't know the answer to it. I suspect they take a long time to break down as well.
Yeah, anecdotally, I don't know, except that we have a lot of madronas around our property, and the leaves seem to break down fairly quickly. And I tried doing a mailbox post out of a madrona stump, figuring, oh, that's going to last forever. It didn't last 2 years, 3 years.
I'll be darned.
Basically, it was rotten. So
Wow.
once it's in contact and wet, it seemed to break down pretty quickly. So I imagine the wood chips would work okay.
I do want to say kudos to you, Will, for finding that little black composter. I certainly didn't get it at Home Depot. In fact, I found it at Granny's about 4 years ago. That particular, I lived in Hawaii before we came to Vashon, and in Hawaii, the county was subsidizing those so people could buy that particular composter for $10. And many people did because it's a good, what I think of as a kitchen composter, a small unit that can use up all your vegetable scraps from the kitchen.
Yeah, King County had that program as well here, and we purchased two of them, I think it was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we inherited with our property one of the county composter places. And like Nancy, without us doing anything, the red wiggler worm showed up, and it's full of them. So we use that primarily for our food also.
Well, when you use compost for the garden, is there a percentage of compost that should be used per volume of garden soil?
Yes, and that's actually a critical question. So on our Zero Waste Vashon site, we actually have links to a calculator. And it really depends the stage the garden is. Ideally, if you've tested your soil in advance, you'll know how much carbon content is in there. But it's kind of hard to overdo compost. And it also depends on what you're growing in the garden. It's hard to give a tomato plant too much compost. And then it's also the composition of the compost. Again, they're starting to discover if it has a very high fungal content, you're actually creating a biome there, particularly if you haven't tilled the soil and disturbed it a lot, that you can actually get a biome going there that will actually feed the plants regardless of NPK content, because they're actually working out the carbon chains and sugar chains to create a delivery system to feed the plant. So it goes back to the adage of feed the soil, not the plants.
Okay.
We do have a question from the chat from Debbie about whether a 50-gallon plastic garbage can would work like the composter bin that Nancy had.
I would love to answer that question. There needs to be oxygen. That's why making a compost bin out of pallets works so well. There's the wood is offset so the oxygen is allowed to get in there somewhat. In my little black composter, I always make the first layer out of really tough twigs and such that take a long time to break down, but they stay under there and allow some oxygen exchange. The other thing about a black garbage can is that you need to allow some of the liquid to leach out if necessary. It's not the best solution. I think a composter made out of pallets would be better than black
I think
plastic garbage can.
if one is creative and doesn't mind modifying it, that you could make it work. And what I would probably do is I turn it upside down so it's open on the bottom. I'd stake it to the ground. I'd cut off the top to act as a lid, and I would drill air holes around it to let air holes. And I think it would work. It'd be a little basic, but I think it would work. But you've hit all the things it has. You need air. in the pile. It needs drainage. I like it being open to the soil underneath to invite all the microbes to kind of wander up there, and the worms if they are in the neighborhood. And if you do it that way, I think I would say if you want to try it, go for it. But I think I would turn it upside down and anchor it to the ground with stakes or something like that so it doesn't blow over, flip over, and then just cut off the top to act as a lid, or use a garbage can lid on the top of this inverted, and be sure to drill air holes all the way around it. I would say, half-inch, 1-inch holes all the way around it to get air circulating.
On that note, Marianne has indicated that she's using a plastic garbage can with holes drilled in it, and it seems to be working in her first try. I should also point out that Rondi has put a link up there to the biodynamic farming and composting that she addressed in her comment some minutes ago.
Yeah. What I like, Marianne made also a comment, is that, I guess she locks the lid on it, she can roll it for mixing.
Yeah, they do that.
That's
yeah.
clever. Nancy, you're muted.
You're muted.
You have to unmute, Nancy.
Yep, I know. I was waiting my turn. I have a question for Nancy. Do you harvest from the little door at the bottom of the black composter, or do you scoop it out of the top?
I do both. The door is meant for that, for harvesting from the bottom, but it's not really very convenient. And like Ken, I gave up turning my compost years ago because it's really hard work. And you can tell from the shape of that black composter, it's kind of hard. So what I do is about every 6 months or so, I take the whole black composter and kind of jiggle it and lift it off the pile and set it to the side, and take with a fork, take the few inches of that pile which aren't composted yet, and turn them into the now empty composter. And the rest is pretty good compost. And then I have the whole thing that I can shovel into a wheelbarrow and take out to the garden or whatever. So that was my way around the door problem.
Yeah, years ago I had one, and the little door thing just was
It's just
a deterrent. Yeah.
nice to peek. You can use it to peek to see how well things are going yet, but it's not really very useful.
Thank you.
I have a comment and just something to share. For the first time in my life, for my raised beds, I've taken soil samples from 5 of my raised beds, and I sent it to King County recently. They have a program that for a lifetime, they'll do 5 samples, soil samples, free of charge. But my real question is does anybody use a commercial NPK tester that you buy from ACE? Are those worth buying? Are they accurate?
So I have bought multiple versions of them, going up and up and up. Sort of is the best way I can say it. I learned so much more by having a real test done. I've used up my 5 for King County, but I used for the Zero Waste Vashon site, for the Waste to Garden site, and now for my home garden. The University of Massachusetts at Amherst has a really good program. They do the proper way of testing the soil. There's different ways of testing it, depending on what solvents you use to break it down. And they use a very non-invasive, non-destructive process and they give a very comprehensive scoring. And I think it's $16 for a test. So that's where I've been sending my stuff. And it's very informative, and they actually tell you, okay, here's what you need, here's what you want to add and work with.
Will, by the way, has added 2 links to the chat stream there on King County soil testing program, and also about a link to a calculator for adding compost.
Logan Labs is another one that a lot of folks are using as well. They use They're around the country someplace. I forget where, but I think in Ohio. But a lot of the nutrient dense growing folks are using that a lot now.
Yeah, we're entering new science in compost because of the work that is now being studied in fungal thing. And I know David Johnson's having to use different labs that actually can go more a deeper dive into the microbiome and calculate, because we're discovering, I mean, this amazing amount of bacteria. The number of viruses and bacteria, like we are talking in the trillions or greater in just a teaspoon. It is phenomenal how live this subject is and how live good compost is.
Yeah, if you want to spend $800 for one of those tests, you can, but
Yeah.
do.
Nancy?
Unmute. This is a question for Nancy and also for Ken or Sheila or Will. I have read that it's important not to put uncured compost onto your plants. I'm a bit of a beginner at all this, so I'm learning. I'm wondering, is that just in the piles that become very heated, or if you have a more casual pile, which is, you know, not reaching the higher temperatures, do you still need to also cure that? Can anybody speak to that particular issue?
Ken?
That's why I allow mine to sit for an entire year or more. It does reach a high temperature depending on how much green material I put in. But as it cools down, like right now, I don't know what my curing pile is, but my active pile is 120 right now. But I won't tap into the curing pile until June. And then by the time I get to the bottom of it, it's probably going to be older than that. So
Nancy,
problems at all.
Nancy, can you
Okay.
tell us what was the caveats? What would happen if you're in, because there's several composting systems that produce compost faster that are not thermophilic, you know, and including your tumbler, and which or my tumbler at least, doesn't get that hot because it's not insulated. But you know, I put compost that's come out of that tumbler system in as little as 6 weeks, and I've never seen anything detrimental. So I'm curious what would be the detriment.
You know, like I said, I am a beginner at this, and so I had just read, I think the implication was that fresh compost could maybe almost burn your plants, like it would be too intense, like putting on too much commercial fertilizer.
I doubt that. What I think it may be, and particularly if it has wood chips in it, is that it's still breaking down. And while it's doing that, it's going to rob the soil of nitrogen.
Right.
Yeah.
Takes
Okay.
nitrogen back out of the soil, which is not good. Unlike Ken, I have not measured the temperature. I'm just too lazy about it, I guess. So I use just sort of common sense. If it feels good and it smells good and it's thoroughly cold, I'm willing to mix it in with my other soil. The risk for me is that I may get some weed seeds still in there because it hasn't fully composted. And I just take that risk. I figure I've got so many weed seeds coming up anyway that it's, I'm a little loose about it all.
Okay. Yeah, I've been applying it, and as long as I mix it with the other soil, and I haven't tried using it 100% because that seemed to be not recommended. But I've been having pretty good luck. I just wondered, you know, what you more experienced folks are doing.
I think it may have to do with what's in the compost itself. Again, if you're using wood chips, then I totally agree that would be a thing. And there's a difference between putting wood chips on the top of a bed as mulch versus mixing them in with the soil.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
So
Thank
we have a question from Debbie Jackson about the use of leaves only piles. in the context of a TED Talk I'm not familiar with, but in the context of a TED Talk who addressed, I guess, leaves only piles. So maybe somebody could respond to Debbie's question.
Well, I have not seen the video without seeing the video. I really can't. I mean, leaves only pile to me would be mimicking a forest floor, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's wonderful.
That's what I have. I have 2 bins that way. Leaves only.
Yeah, we don't. Though I can go out in the woods and I can grab leaves like that. I grab all the leaves I can because I mulch my garden beds with leaves over the winter. And then I just turn those leaves, whatever's left in the spring, into the bed. And I mean, the beds are full of worms because worms absolutely love leaves. And I run the lawnmower over them first, so they're broken down a bit, ready to start. And it works very nicely, and it's helping build up the soil at the same time. So my leaf piles are actually on the beds themselves.
Mm-hmm.
My situation, I think, would be similar in that I don't, for brown, in my black composter, I use leaves. And leaves in the woods are very often full of fungal matter, which is good. Maybe that's why I get so many worms in my kitchen composter. But I do not make just piles of leaves. Ken is using piles of leaves, but he's in a contained space too.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think we're over
One
time.
more.
But
Over.
if Debbie Jackson, if you could send the link to that TED video, I'd love to watch it. I'll look for it. And if anybody has additional questions, you can go to info, or you can send them to info@zerowastefashion.org, and we'll be happy to field them. We'll have one more series, so if you think of something in the next 2 weeks, write them down and share them with us next time. And I'm going to hand it back to Nancy now for closing.
All right. Well, thank you, Will, and Nancy and Sheila and Ken for sharing with us all of your knowledge and in your homes and your gardens and your systems. We really appreciate it. It's so nice to have a local face on this. I think it's inspiring. And thank you again for joining us as well on this rather busy day. And we hope that you can come back in 2 weeks and learn more about other sorts of systems and let your friends know as well. And thank you, Tom, for compiling the chat comments. We appreciate all that. So do go to our website, www.zerowastefashion.org, if you want more information or links or contacts. We will be posting recordings of these sessions on on YouTube, and there will be a link to that on our website. That takes a little bit of time to get that put up there, but if you want to review that or share it with a friend that couldn't make it today, that's a good way to do it. So hope you all have a wonderful day in 2 weeks.